The frozen planet of Veyra 9 was dying under fire. Giant explosions burned across the dark sky while alien ships crashed into the snow-covered ground. The war between the Royal Empire and the Shadow Hunters had already destroyed half the planet. Soldiers ran through the ruined city trying only to survive. In the middle of the chaos, one human soldier was left behind. His name was Ethan Cole. Blood covered his jacket, and cold wind hit his face like knives. Even after losing his team, Ethan still forced himself to move through the broken streets. Ethan's breathing became heavier as he entered the ruins of an old alien building. His arm was injured and one side of his face was burned from the battle. He knew the enemy hunters were close. Their strange clicking sounds echoed through the darkness outside. Ethan checked the last bullet inside his weapon and leaned against a cracked wall. For the first time in years, he believed this mission would be his last. Then suddenly, he heard something unexpected, a quiet sound. Someone was crying nearby. At first, Ethan thought it was a trap. The hunters often used fake sounds to lure soldiers, but the crying continued. Soft, weak, scared. Ethan slowly followed the sound deeper into the ruins. Broken metal and shattered glass covered the floor. Finally, he stopped near a collapsed doorway. Under a heavy piece of metal, he saw a small alien child trapped in the snow. She looked no older than 8 years old. Her silver eyes glowed softly in the dark, and strange royal markings covered her pale blue skin. The little girl looked terrified when she saw him. She tried to move away even though she was trapped. Ethan slowly lowered his weapon so she would not panic. He noticed blood on her leg and deep fear in her eyes. Outside, the sounds of enemy hunters were getting closer. The child whispered something in her alien language, but Ethan could not understand her. Still, he understood one thing clearly. If he left her there, she would die. Ethan took a deep breath and pushed the heavy metal off her with all the strength he had left. The girl almost fell when she tried to stand, but Ethan caught her before she hit the ground. She stared at him in shock. Humans were feared in many parts of the galaxy, yet this wounded stranger had just saved her life. Ethan wrapped part of his torn jacket around her injured leg. Before he could say anything, loud footsteps echoed outside the building. Enemy hunters had found them. Their glowing red masks appeared through the smoke as they aimed strange black weapons toward the child. Ethan's eyes widened when he realized who the girl really was. The royal marks on her skin belonged only to the Emperor's bloodline. She was not an ordinary child. She was royalty. One hunter suddenly shouted in a harsh alien voice, and several poisoned arrows flew through the air. The arrows were aimed directly at the little girl's heart. Without even thinking, Ethan jumped in front of her. Sharp pain exploded through his body as 3 poisoned arrows pierced his chest and shoulder. The child screamed in fear as Ethan collapsed onto the snowy floor. Dark poison quickly spread through his veins like burning fire. Ethan could barely breathe. The hunters moved closer, ready to finish them both, but Ethan forced himself to stand one last time. With shaking hands, he fired his final bullet, causing part of the ruined ceiling to crash down between them and the enemy soldiers. Smoke and snow filled the room. Ethan grabbed the girl's shoulders and looked into her frightened eyes. "Run," he whispered painfully. "Just run." Tears rolled down the child's face as she shook her head. She did not want to leave him, but the hunters were already climbing over the rubble. Ethan pushed her gently toward a broken tunnel leading underground. The girl looked back at him one final time before disappearing into the darkness. Ethan smiled weakly after seeing her escape. For the first time that night, he felt peace. Maybe saving one life was enough. The poison inside his body became stronger every second. Ethan slowly fell backward into the snow while cold wind moved through the destroyed building. His vision became blurry. The sounds of war faded around him. Then suddenly, something strange happened. Deep beneath the ruins, ancient alien machines started glowing with blue light. Symbols lit up across the floor around Ethan's body. Hidden royal technology, sleeping for centuries, had finally activated. The hunters stopped moving when they saw the glowing symbols. Fear appeared even in their eyes. Ethan tried to understand what was happening, but his body no longer obeyed him. Metal doors opened beneath the ground, and a glass chamber slowly rose from below the ruins. Blue energy surrounded Ethan as invisible machines pulled the poisoned arrows from his body. His eyes grew heavier. Before losing consciousness completely, Ethan saw the small alien girl watching him secretly from the tunnel entrance. Then darkness swallowed everything. And the last thing Ethan heard was the frightened voice of the child whispering softly, "I will never forget you." Ethan Cole woke to a strange silence that did not feel natural. It was not the silence after war or the silence of peace. It felt cold, empty, and lifeless, like a place forgotten by time itself. His eyes slowly opened as pale blue light filled his vision from every direction. For several seconds he could not understand where he was. His body felt heavy, and sharp pain still burned deep inside his chest, where the poisoned arrows had struck him long ago. Strange icy mist floated around him inside a tall glass chamber while soft mechanical sounds echoed through the darkness around him. A loud metallic hiss suddenly broke the silence as the chamber slowly opened. Ethan immediately fell forward onto a cold metal floor, coughing painfully while fresh air entered his lungs. His hands trembled badly as he forced himself to breathe normally again. Every muscle in his body felt weak, almost lifeless, as though he had been sleeping for years. Ethan slowly pushed himself upward and looked around carefully. Massive silver machines covered the walls of the dark room, blinking with weak fading lights. Dust floated through the air everywhere. The place looked less like a medical room and more like an ancient tomb buried under forgotten ruins. As Ethan tried to steady his breathing, his eyes suddenly stopped on something standing in the center of the chamber. A giant stone statue towered above him under pale blue lights. Ethan froze completely after seeing the face carved into the stone. It was him. The statue showed a wounded human soldier standing protectively in front of a small alien child, while poisoned arrows pierced his body. Strange, glowing alien words were carved beneath the statue in silver markings. Ethan slowly stepped closer while confusion filled his mind. He could not understand why anyone would build something like this for him. He had only saved one frightened child during a battle. Nothing more. Before Ethan could think clearly, the dark room suddenly came alive around him. Ancient screens hidden inside the walls activated one after another, flashing strange alien symbols across the chamber. Bright lights reflected across the dusty machines, while warning sounds echoed softly through hidden speakers above him. Ethan immediately searched for his weapon by instinct, but his gun was gone. His heartbeat became faster as a cold female voice suddenly echoed through the chamber. At first the language sounded completely alien, but after a few seconds the machine slowly changed into broken human words. Life support complete, subject identified, Ethan Cole, recovery process successful, time elapsed, 50 years. The words struck Ethan harder than any weapon ever could. His face lost all color as his breathing suddenly became uneven. 50 years. Ethan grabbed the side of a machine to stop himself from collapsing back onto the floor. His mind refused to accept what he had just heard. For him, only a few hours had passed since the battle on Veyra 9. He still remembered the burning sky, the freezing snow, and the terrified little girl crying beside him inside the ruins. But now the machines were telling him that half a century had disappeared while he slept inside this hidden chamber. A deep emptiness slowly spread through Ethan's chest as the truth became clearer. Everyone he once knew was probably gone forever. His fellow soldiers, his commanders, and even his family back on Earth were likely dead now. The entire world he remembered no longer existed. Ethan lowered his head silently while countless thoughts crashed inside his mind. Before he could process anything else, loud warning alarms suddenly exploded through the chamber. Red emergency lights flashed violently across the walls as heavy footsteps echoed from somewhere outside the massive doors. Unauthorized awakening detected. Royal security forces incoming. Ethan's military instincts immediately returned despite the weakness in his body. He forced himself to move quickly while searching the chamber for anything he could use as a weapon. Near one broken console, he found an old emergency blade hanging from the wall. The metal knife felt cold and heavy in his shaking hands. The footsteps outside grew louder every second. Whoever was coming already knew he was awake. Ethan tightened his grip on the blade and positioned himself near the chamber entrance, preparing for a possible fight even though his body still felt exhausted. The giant metal doors finally opened with a thunderous sound. Bright white light flooded into the dark chamber so suddenly that Ethan could barely see. He raised the blade carefully while shadows slowly became clear before him. Dozens of armored alien soldiers stood outside in perfect formation. Their silver armor reflected the bright lights while glowing rifles rested firmly in their hands. Ethan counted at least 50 soldiers surrounding the entrance. Behind them, royal banners moved softly in the air, marked with the same glowing symbol he had seen on the little girl years ago inside the ruined city. Ethan waited for them to attack, but nobody moved. The soldiers simply stared at him in complete silence. Then suddenly, every single soldier dropped onto one knee at the exact same moment. Ethan's eyes widened in confusion as the entire royal army bowed their heads toward him. He looked behind himself for a moment, thinking someone important had entered the room without him noticing. But nobody else was there. The soldiers were kneeling to him. A path slowly opened between the rows of guards while soft footsteps echoed from the hallway beyond them. Ethan looked up as a tall alien woman slowly walked forward through the soldiers. She wore elegant white royal robes covered with glowing silver patterns that moved softly under the lights. Her long dark hair flowed behind her gracefully, and her silver eyes carried both strength and sadness at the same time. The moment Ethan saw her face clearly, his breathing stopped completely. He recognized those eyes immediately. They belonged to the frightened little girl he had saved 50 years ago. But now she was no longer a helpless child hiding inside ruins during war. She had become something far greater. She was a queen. The woman slowly stopped only a few feet away from Ethan, while thousands of emotions filled her silver eyes. Tears quietly gathered near her face as she looked at him like someone finally seeing a miracle after losing hope long ago. Ethan could not speak at all. His mind still struggled to understand everything happening around him. The soldiers remained perfectly silent while the queen continued staring at the man who had once given his life to protect her. Then, to Ethan's complete shock, the queen slowly lowered herself onto both knees before him. The ruler of an entire empire bowed her head respectfully while every soldier inside the chamber remained frozen in silence. Ethan stood there speechless while the woman looked up at him with tears shining softly in her eyes. In a quiet, emotional voice, she finally whispered, "I searched for you. For 50 years." The royal palace of Astronova looked more like a floating city than a home built for rulers. Massive silver towers stretched high above the clouds, while glowing ships moved silently through the dark sky around them. Inside the palace, everything carried a cold and beautiful elegance that almost felt unreal to Ethan Cole. White crystal walls reflected soft blue lights across endless hallways, and silent royal guards stood beside every doorway without moving. Even the air inside the palace felt different from the battlefields Ethan once knew. Yet despite all the beauty surrounding him, Ethan felt completely alone in this strange future world. 2 royal guards escorted Ethan through the enormous palace halls while servants and officers secretly watched him from a distance. Some looked shocked after seeing a human inside the royal palace. Others looked afraid, almost nervous, as if they were staring at something dangerous. Ethan could hear whispers spreading quietly behind him everywhere he walked. People spoke his name carefully, like it belonged to an old legend from another age. Ethan hated every second of the attention. He was not a hero or some mythical figure. He was simply a soldier who failed to die 50 years ago. The guards finally stopped in front of giant silver doors covered in glowing royal symbols. As the doors slowly opened, Ethan stepped inside a private royal chamber, larger than most homes he had ever seen. A massive glass window overlooked the endless futuristic city outside, while soft rain touched the glass gently beyond it. Queen Lyra stood quietly near the window with her back turned toward him. Her elegant white robes moved softly with the wind flowing through the chamber, and silver light reflected beautifully across her long dark hair. The guards bowed respectfully before leaving the room and sealing the doors behind Ethan. For several long moments, silence filled the chamber between them. Ethan slowly studied the woman standing near the window. Even after 50 years, part of her still looked like the frightened little girl he had protected inside the ruined city during the war. The same sadness still lived quietly inside her silver eyes. Lyra finally turned toward him slowly, and for the first time Ethan truly saw the weight carried by a queen who ruled an entire empire alone. "You still look at me like I am that child from the ruins," Lyra said softly while watching him carefully. Ethan crossed his arms while leaning slightly against the wall beside him. "Because that is the last thing I remember," he answered honestly. "One minute you were a scared little girl hiding from hunters. The next minute I wake up and find out you rule half the galaxy." A faint smile appeared on Lyra's face after hearing his words, but sadness still remained behind it. "And I spent 50 years believing you would never wake again," she replied quietly. Ethan looked away toward the city outside the giant window. Thousands of glowing lights stretched endlessly into the darkness while flying ships crossed between distant towers high above the clouds. Everything felt impossible to him. This future world no longer belonged to the soldier he once was. 50 years had erased everything familiar from his life. The thought left a heavy emptiness inside his chest that refused to disappear. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "What happened after that night?" he asked in a low voice. "After the battle?" Lyra's expression slowly changed the moment she heard the question. She walked closer to the center of the chamber before answering carefully. "The war became worse after you saved me," she said quietly. "Only weeks later, my father was killed during the final attacks against the Empire. Entire planets were burning. Millions of people had already lost hope that the Empire could survive." She paused briefly while painful memories filled her eyes again. But then stories about a human soldier protecting the royal child began spreading everywhere. Ethan frowned slightly after hearing that. "Stories do not win wars," he said. "No," Lyra answered softly while looking directly into his eyes. "But hope does. People heard about a dying human who gave his life to save someone from another species. Soldiers who wanted to surrender returned to the battlefield because of that story. Entire worlds united again because they believed sacrifice like yours meant the galaxy was still worth saving." Ethan remained silent after hearing her words. He never imagined his actions could affect so many lives. To him, protecting the child had simply felt like the right thing to do in that moment. Nothing more. But inside this empire, his sacrifice had become something much larger than himself. Lyra slowly stepped closer while her voice became quieter. "After the battle ended, royal scientists found your body beneath the ruins. The poison inside you should have killed you instantly, but ancient machines hidden under the city reacted strangely to your body." She looked down briefly before continuing. "The machines placed you into stasis and slowed the poison spreading through your system. The scientists wanted to study you, but I refused to let them touch you." Ethan stared at her carefully. "So you kept me asleep all these years?" Lyra's silver eyes filled softly with emotion. "I refused to let you die," she whispered. A heavy silence filled the room again after her words. Ethan slowly turned away while anger and pain mixed together inside him. "Do you understand what 50 years means?" he asked quietly but sharply. "Everyone I knew is gone now. My entire life disappeared while I slept inside a machine." Lyra lowered her eyes after hearing the pain in his voice. "I know," she answered softly. "And there was not a single day during those 50 years when I stopped regretting it." Before Ethan could respond, a massive explosion suddenly shook the entire palace violently. The floor beneath them trembled, while red emergency lights instantly flashed across the chamber walls. Loud alarms screamed through the halls outside as guards began shouting orders in panic. Ethan's military instincts activated immediately as he turned toward the sealed doors. Lyra's calm expression disappeared instantly, replaced by the cold focus of a ruler used to danger. A frightened royal officer suddenly rushed into the chamber and dropped onto one knee before the queen. His breathing was uneven, and blood covered one side of his silver armor. "Your Majesty," the officer said urgently, "the southern security wing has been attacked. Several guards are already dead." Lyra's eyes narrowed dangerously after hearing the report. "Who was responsible?" she demanded. The officer hesitated nervously before answering. Ethan immediately noticed fear spreading across the man's face. Slowly, the officer turned toward Ethan. The attackers delivered only one message before escaping, he said carefully. They demanded the death of the human. At that exact moment, every light inside the royal chamber suddenly shut off completely. Darkness swallowed the room while the emergency alarms outside continued echoing through the palace halls. Ethan immediately stepped forward protectively while his eyes searched the shadows around them. Then a cold metallic sound echoed quietly from somewhere behind him. Someone inside the darkness had just loaded a weapon.
Darkness swallowed the royal chamber as the palace alarms continued screaming through the halls outside. Ethan's body reacted instantly before his mind could fully think. Years of battlefield training took control again. He grabbed Lyra's arm and pulled her away from the center of the room, just as a glowing energy shot exploded through the darkness. The blast struck the wall behind them, sending pieces of crystal and burning metal across the chamber floor. Royal guards outside immediately shouted in panic while footsteps rushed toward the room from every direction. Ethan pushed Lyra behind a large metal pillar while searching the darkness carefully. His eyes slowly adjusted to the emergency red lights flashing weakly across the chamber. Somewhere inside the room, an assassin was hiding silently among the shadows. Ethan could hear slow breathing nearby. The attacker was waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. Another glowing shot suddenly flashed through the darkness toward Lyra's position, but Ethan reacted immediately. He grabbed a fallen metal chair and blocked the attack seconds before it reached her. The energy blast shattered the chair apart instantly. Lyra stared at Ethan in shock while guards finally stormed into the chamber, carrying glowing rifles. The assassin moved quickly through the darkness after realizing surprise was lost. Ethan noticed a black shadow rushing toward the broken window at the far end of the room. Without hesitation, he chased after the attacker while the guards shouted behind him to stop. The assassin smashed through the glass and jumped onto a moving transport platform outside the palace walls. Cold rain hit Ethan's face the moment he reached the shattered window. Far below him, the glowing city stretched endlessly through the night. The assassin escaped rapidly across floating traffic lanes between the towers. Ethan looked down only once before making his decision. Ignoring the dangerous height beneath him, he jumped from the broken window onto another passing platform below. Shocked, civilians screamed as Ethan landed hard beside them before continuing the chase across the moving traffic above the city. The assassin moved with unnatural speed through the crowded sky lanes. Black armor covered the figure completely, hiding both face and identity. Ethan pushed past frightened civilians while jumping between moving transport platforms high above the city lights. Rain poured heavily around them, making every step more dangerous. One mistake would send him falling thousands of feet toward the streets below, but Ethan refused to let the attacker escape after bringing violence directly into Lyra's palace. Finally, the assassin leaped onto the roof of an abandoned tower near the outer edge of the city. Ethan followed seconds later, landing roughly against the wet metal surface. Strong wind howled around the tower while thunder echoed across the dark sky above them. For several seconds, both figures stood silently facing each other beneath the storm. Then the assassin slowly removed part of the black mask covering the face. Ethan's eyes narrowed immediately. The attacker was not a machine or monster. He was another human. He should have stayed dead, the stranger said coldly while lowering his weapon slightly. The moment the Empire learns the truth about you, everything falls apart. Ethan stared carefully at the man before speaking. Who are you? The stranger gave a small, bitter smile. Someone trying to save humanity from becoming slaves to alien rulers. Before Ethan could respond, the assassin suddenly attacked again. A glowing blade extended from his arm as he rushed forward through the rain. Ethan barely avoided the strike before countering with a hard punch to the attacker's chest. The fight became brutal instantly. Metal crashed against metal while rain poured heavily across the rooftop around them. Ethan realized quickly that the stranger was highly trained, possibly former military like himself. The assassin suddenly kicked Ethan backward near the edge of the tower. You think she saved you because she cared? The man shouted angrily over the storm. You are nothing but a symbol to them. A weapon they can control. Ethan's jaw tightened after hearing those words. Part of him already feared the same thing since waking inside the palace. But before he could answer, royal aircraft suddenly surrounded the tower from every direction. Bright searchlights flooded the rooftop, while armed guards aimed rifles toward the assassin. The stranger laughed quietly while stepping backward toward the edge of the building. "This empire is rotting from the inside," he warned Ethan, "and soon the queen herself will drown with it." Then, before anyone could stop him, the assassin jumped backward into the storm below. Ethan rushed toward the edge immediately, expecting to see the body crash far beneath the city. But the man had disappeared completely into the darkness and rain. Minutes later, Ethan returned to the palace surrounded by heavily armed guards. The atmosphere inside had changed completely. Fear spread through every hallway now. Servants whispered nervously while officers rushed between security stations preparing for more attacks. News of the assassination attempt was already spreading across the empire. Some blamed enemies outside the kingdom. Others blamed Ethan himself. Inside the royal war chamber, several powerful nobles argued loudly while giant holograms displayed security reports above the table. The moment Ethan entered beside Lyra, the room fell silent instantly. Many of the nobles looked at him with open hatred, while others seemed terrified by his presence. One older noble finally stood angrily. "This human brings chaos wherever he goes," he declared loudly. "He should never have been awakened." Several others immediately agreed. "He is dangerous. The empire was stable before his return. Cannot trust humans." Ethan remained silent while listening to the accusations around him. He expected Lyra to stay quiet and protect her political power. Instead, the queen slowly rose from her throne with cold fury visible in her silver eyes. "He risked his life to save mine when your own soldiers abandoned me," Lyra said sharply. "None of you will speak of him like a criminal inside my presence again." The chamber became silent immediately, but Ethan noticed something important in that moment. Fear. Not fear of him. Fear of what his return could do to the empire itself, and somewhere beyond the safety of the palace walls. Hidden enemies were already preparing their next move.
The royal capital of Astronova no longer felt peaceful after the attack inside the palace. Fear spread through the massive city like a growing storm, while security ships filled the skies both day and night. Armed soldiers guarded every tower, hallway, and entrance connected to the royal district. Even ordinary civilians could feel that something terrible was approaching the empire once again. Rumors about Ethan Cole continued spreading across the galaxy faster than the royal government could stop them. Some planets called him the savior of the Queen, while others believed his return would bring another galactic war. Everywhere people asked the same dangerous question: why had the ancient enemy returned the exact moment the human awakened? Ethan stood silently inside the royal war chamber while giant holograms floated above a massive circular table in the center of the room. Red warning symbols flashed across dozens of star systems displayed on the glowing galaxy map. Entire military stations had disappeared during the last few days near the outer borders of the empire. Mining colonies stopped responding without explanation, and several patrol fleets never returned after entering deep space. Something dangerous was moving through the darkness beyond the empire, and everyone inside the chamber could feel the growing tension. Even the experienced commanders looked nervous while studying the reports. "The border worlds are collapsing faster than expected," one royal commander reported while adjusting the holograms floating before him. "Survivors claim enemy warships appeared from nowhere before attacking entire cities without warning." Another officer slowly turned toward Queen Lyra, with visible concern in his eyes. "Your Majesty, the ships carry the same markings used during the ancient war 50 years ago." The chamber became completely silent after those words. Ethan slowly lifted his eyes toward the floating galaxy map above the table. Even after half a century, he still remembered those symbols clearly. The hunters had once burned entire worlds searching for power and conquest. Ethan had believed they were destroyed long ago after the war ended. "The hunters survived," Ethan said quietly. Lyra nodded slowly beside him while keeping her eyes on the hologram. "We believed the remaining fleets disappeared into deep space after the war," she answered, "but somehow they have returned stronger than before." Another commander activated additional holograms showing destroyed cities burning beneath dark skies. "Their attacks are different this time," he explained carefully. "They are not trying to conquer planets or steal resources. They appear to be searching for something specific." Ethan suddenly felt uneasy after hearing those words. Before anyone else could continue speaking, Loud emergency alarms exploded violently across the entire chamber. The giant hologram map instantly turned blood red while warning messages flashed across every screen surrounding the room. Enemy fleet detected near the capital system. Multiple warships exiting hyperspace. Estimated arrival in 12 minutes. Panic immediately spread throughout the chamber. Officers rushed toward communication stations while military commanders shouted orders through emergency channels. Ethan watched carefully as hundreds of enemy warships appeared across the hologram like a dark storm surrounding the capital system itself. Then he noticed something strange. The enemy fleet was not moving toward military stations or defense platforms. They were heading directly toward the royal palace. Lyra noticed it at the exact same moment. Her silver eyes narrowed dangerously while the reality became impossible to ignore. "They are coming for us," she whispered quietly. Suddenly, the main hologram flickered violently before changing into the image of a tall, armored figure wearing black war armor covered in glowing red symbols. The face remained hidden behind a dark metallic mask, but the cold voice that echoed through the chamber carried pure hatred. "Queen Lyra of Astronova," the figure said slowly. "Deliver the human known as Ethan Cole, and your empire will survive." The entire chamber froze after hearing those words. Ethan felt every pair of eyes inside the room slowly turning toward him. The masked figure continued speaking while enemy warships burned behind him across the hologram. "The poison inside his body belongs to us," the enemy leader declared coldly. 50 years ago, he should have died beneath your ruined city. Instead, you stole what was ours." Ethan's chest tightened painfully after hearing those words. Lyra immediately stepped forward while anger filled her voice. "You destroyed entire worlds simply to hunt one man?" she demanded. The masked figure gave a low, cold laugh that echoed across the chamber. "He is no longer simply a man." Suddenly, the hologram changed again. Ancient alien symbols appeared beside detailed medical scans showing Ethan's body inside the hidden stasis chamber where he had slept for 50 years. Strange, glowing energy moved visibly beneath his skin like burning fire trapped inside his veins. The poison arrows used against him were created using forbidden energy older than your empire itself, the enemy leader explained slowly. No normal living being could survive exposure to that power. Yet somehow the human adapted. The chamber became silent again while officers stared at the scans in shock. Ethan himself could barely understand what he was seeing. Since awakening inside the hidden chamber, strange pain had continued spreading through his body every day. Sometimes the scars on his chest burned with unnatural heat strong enough to leave smoke rising from his skin. Until now, nobody knew the reason. The masked leader slowly raised one armored hand toward the hologram. "Inside his blood now exists power capable of destroying entire civilizations," he declared. "And we will reclaim it." Lyra immediately stepped protectively beside Ethan while guards raised weapons around the chamber. "We will never hand him over," she answered firmly. The enemy leader remained silent for several seconds before finally responding in a cold, emotionless voice. "Then your galaxy burns with him." The transmission ended instantly. Only seconds later, the entire palace shook violently as massive explosions thundered across the skies above the capital city. Enemy warships had already reached Astronova. Bright fireballs erupted across the atmosphere while defense fleets launched desperately from military stations surrounding the planet. Through the giant windows of the chamber, Ethan could see hundreds of ships battling across the night sky above the glowing city. Explosions filled the heavens while civilians screamed far below in the streets. The war had returned fully to the Empire. Royal officers rushed around the chamber in chaos while Queen Lyra quickly activated military commands across every nearby system. Ethan remained standing silently near the giant windows while watching the burning skies outside. Suddenly, sharp pain exploded through the scars across his chest again. Ethan grabbed the wall beside him as dark glowing energy spread beneath his skin like burning cracks moving through his body. Lyra immediately rushed toward him with fear visible in her eyes. "Ethan!" For one terrifying second, blue fire burst outward from the scars across his chest before disappearing completely. Several nearby officers stepped backward in fear after witnessing it happen. Ethan slowly lowered his shaking hands while confusion filled his face. The enemy leader had spoken the truth. Something inside him was changing, and somewhere beyond the burning skies above Astronova, millions of enemy soldiers were already crossing the galaxy to claim whatever Ethan Cole had become.